This is Hyundai's bestseller in America. It is, of course, the 2025 Tucson, and this specific Tucson is the best-selling Hyundai Hybrid in America. For 2025, they've made some important changes to all Tucson models, but importantly, the hybrid system gets more power and more refinement. So not only are you going to be saving about $700 a year on average by choosing the hybrid model over the regular trim, you're also going to get the best performance in the Tucson lineup. Yep, the hybrid isn't just the most efficient, it's also the swiftest 0 to 60. So how does this stack up against the competition? Bearing in mind that we're going to get an all-new Forester hybrid this year, and we're going to be losing the Escape hybrid, well, let's find out. Let's talk about the competition for a moment. We have the RAV4 Hybrid, the stalwart in this segment, the Honda CR-V Hybrid. Both of those manufacturers expect to sell about half of their lineups as hybrids in 2025. We then have the Ford Escape Hybrid, which is being discontinued this year, the Kia Sportage Hybrid, which is the close sistership to this, the new Forester Hybrid, and the Mazda CX-50 Hybrid, which is a Mazda with a RAV4 heart transplant. In this segment, one big reason to get the Tucson and the Sportage is that we have more power under the hood than average, and therefore better 0 to 60 performance. We also have a mechanical all-wheel drive system, decent pricing, and if you're interested in a plug-in hybrid, this is going to be one of only 3 models on offer as soon as that Escape plug-in hybrid rolls off into the sunset. It appears that production may have already stopped on that Escape, so if you really wanted one of those, you better act fast. Also, if you want a plug-in hybrid with a true mechanical all-wheel drive system, there's only one show in town. It's the one with the Hyundai or the Kia logo attached. Now let's talk about the design. It has been refreshed for 2025, but it should be pretty familiar if you've seen one of these before. We have these illuminated elements inside the grille module here. They've gotten a little bit larger and more distinct for 2025. The headlights, those are still down lower on the bumper. Today we're taking a look at the limited trim, so this is a fully loaded model. Keep that in mind as we look around. We have things like the front parking sensors right there, and instead of the radar sensor behind the Hyundai logo, they put it a little offset on the lower portion of the bumper here. Speaking of headlights, the limited trim gets the projector headlights you see here. The rest of the lineup still gets a full LED lamp, but they're reflectors, and they are going to look a little bit different and perhaps a little bit less expensive. So when it comes to our high beam and low beam score here, I think these do really well. They have a nice broad beam to them and they're fairly bright, but I wasn't able to test the lower end trims. Certainly keep that in mind. With an overall length of 182.7 inches, this is right between the RAV4 and the CR-V in terms of general dimension. The CR-V is not as well packaged in this generation as it has been in the past. It has a slightly longer hood than we find here, and slightly less interior room in some critical dimensions. I will mention this here, but we'll talk about it more when it comes to the seats, that not every company measures legroom the same way, so keep that in mind when you're comparing this to something like especially a Ford Escape, which seems huge on the inside, but in reality is not really that big. Pay attention to the general dimensions of the vehicle and how long the overhangs are when you're car shopping, whether that hood is really long or whether there's a bumper that sticks out really long from the back. Just because the car is bigger on the outside does not mean it's bigger on the inside. You will notice that when you look at something like the new Forester Hybrid. The Forester Hybrid has a long hood because of its drivetrain design, and that does mean slightly squished interior dimensions, even though on paper the legroom figures seem pretty similar. Around back, we find LED brake lights and a big LED light bar with these sort of fang-like protrusions that go into the hatch and into the body. But you'll notice the turn signals and the backup lights, they're not up here, and they're not full LED. They're way down there at the bottom of the bumper, where they are a little bit more likely to get crunched in the event of an accident, or if, say, you just back up into something in your driveway. Perhaps that's why they're incandescent, because they may be cheaper to replace. I sort of wish that in this redesign, Hyundai had located them up here in this light bar, because I think there would have been room, especially if they'd turned maybe this fang or that fang into the turn signal. Under the hood is where we really start to see some big differences between this and the rest of the competition, excluding, of course, the related Kia Sportage. There's no CVT under here, whether we're talking about the regular gasoline engine or the hybrid or the plug-in hybrid. There's also no all-wheel drive system. It's mechanical all-wheel drive in every version. The base model, that's going to get a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine with a regular 8-speed automatic transmission, 187 horsepower, and between 26 and 28 miles per gallon, depending on the options you choose. Then we get the only turbocharged hybrid system in this segment. It's based around a 1.6-liter turbo. This is pretty familiar. It's been around Hyundai's lineup for quite some time. It produces 178 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque in its own right. It's mated to 2 electric motor generators. One replaces the alternator, it hangs out over here, and it generates power when you're parked or whenever it may need to. Other than that, it's just there to start and stop the engine. We then have a bigger electric motor integrated into the transmission case. That produces 64 horsepower, 195 pound-feet of torque, bringing the system total up to 231 horsepower, 271 pound-feet of torque. This is one of the torquiest hybrids in this segment. But importantly, unlike most of the hybrids, if the battery is exhausted, you actually still have 195 pound-feet of torque, because that's coming straight from the engine. So it does feel a little bit more normative, even in hilly situations or mountain climbs when the battery is depleted. Now, the transmission is also a point of differentiation because it's a regular 6-speed automatic transmission. If you don't like that CVT-like feel that we get in the Honda or in the Toyota hybrids, you might want this one because it's a regular 6-speed auto. On the downside, the regular 6-speed auto and the mechanical all-wheel drive system are likely why fuel economy is a bit below some of the competition. This one is rated for 35 miles per gallon city, 35 miles per gallon highway, and logically 35 miles per gallon combined, not 40 mpg like you'll find in the Toyota. If you get the blue trim, which uses skinnier tires and a bunch of other weight-saving measures, then you're going to bump that up to 38 miles per gallon combined, but most of the models are going to be 35. At $4.25 a gallon, the average owner should be saving about $700 a year on gas versus the non-hybrid model, but if you wanted to save $1,100 a year or more, you might want to check out the plug-in hybrid. That bumps the electric motor in the transmission up to 97 horsepower for a combined 268 horsepower, but it is going to be a little slower than this one because it has a 13.8 kilowatt-hour battery in the back. You'll still get 35 miles per gallon combined, but you will also get 33 miles of all-electric range. And that battery will recharge in under 2 hours if you have a level 2 charging station at home. Behind the power hatch, we find one of the largest and one of the squarest cargo areas in this segment. You'll notice that there are 2 different ratings, 38.7 cubic feet and 41.2 cubic feet for the Tucson. Hyundai gives us the maximum cargo room capable if you have the rear seats in their most upright position and the load floor either removed or in its lowest position. Any way you slice it though, this is a really big cargo area. When the load floor is in its most upright position, it's level with the cargo area opening. You can also drop it down several inches if you want to maximize cargo space. You'll notice that under there, we don't have a spare tire. Instead, we have a tire mobility kit, which is what we see in basically all the Hyundai hybrids, but Hyundai did not remove the area where you could put a spare tire. We even have the threaded attachment point. So if you wanted to get a spare tire for a regular Tucson, it would bolt right into the Tucson Hybrid. Absolutely no problem. You could even put a full-size spare tire completely under the load floor as long as it was just in this upright position. Now, if you get the plug-in hybrid, there's no place to put the spare. In our game of 24-inch roller bag Tetris, I was able to squeeze 6 24-inch bags back here with the load floor in its low position. Actually, you could do that in the high position as well. I was not able to get a 7th no matter how I tried, but as you can see, there's plenty of room in here because I could actually put that 24-inch roller bag in that position, put some extra cargo around it, and I would have no problem squeezing the bags in here. In fact, there are actually a number of different ways you can squeeze the roller bags in the back and still easily close the power hatch. That does mean this is a little bit more practical and a little bit roomier than what we see in the RAV4. In this limited trim, I give driver's seat comfort 9 out of 10 points, and I do specify the driver's seat because the passenger seat is lacking the 2-way lumbar support that we find over here. It's worth noting the driver's seat doesn't have 4-way lumbar. I found it well positioned for my back, but if you're shorter or taller than I am, you might want to find something with that 4-way adjustable lumbar feature. We have the 2-position seat memory over there and a manual tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty decent range of motion. I think it actually would be pretty easy for short and tall drivers to find a good driving position as far as the wheel's concerned. Just keep that lumbar support in mind. While we're talking about people of different heights, I should say that we do have a lot of headroom here. 40.1 inches maximum in the front, and we have a dashboard that's relatively low. It's not as bulky as some of the competition, so if you're a shorter driver, it's going to be easier for you to see over it, and if you're a taller driver, you'll have enough headroom. Jumping into the back seat, you'll notice I have tons of legroom with that front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. And that seat happened to actually be a little bit further back than this passenger seat, which had a 6'5" person in it. So just the way the dashboard is shaped, people may be a little bit closer or a little bit further away. Any way you slice it, there's lots of legroom in here. 82.7 inches of combined legroom is among the best. But we should talk about some of the fuzzy math that's being used in this segment, especially by Ford. The way that legroom is measured is it's measured basically from your hip point to your knee and then down there towards the floor, sort of at that angle. So if your rear seats are higher off the ground, you can get more legroom, even though you haven't actually changed the distance from one seat to the other. But what Ford's doing is they're measuring front seat legroom with the front seats all the way back, and then they're measuring back seat legroom by moving that front seat a little further forward to give you a little bit more room. And that's just cheating, if I'm perfectly honest. I don't know all of the other legroom measurement techniques that are being used by other manufacturers in this segment, but Ford is the most egregious in the way that they're measuring legroom, and that's why the Escape's back seat feels tight, because it is. Now, in the Subaru Forester, there may be a little bit of that going on because it certainly doesn't feel this roomy, even though the numbers appear basically the same. This is a big deal for families with kids in rear-facing child seats, especially those big, bulky convertible seats. If you plan on doing extended rear-facing, you could definitely do that in the Tucson, and you simply could not in the RAV4. In fact, in the RAV4, there's not enough legroom in that model for me to comfortably drive the vehicle and adequately and safely put really any rear-facing child seat behind. The amount of room we have in here is really obvious when you take a look at this rear-facing child seat. This is one of the largest available currently. It has the capacity for rear-facing up to 40 pounds, as you can see there, and we still have an appropriate amount of room between the front seat back and, of course, that child seat. Now, there are a few considerations. If you plan on using the latch anchors, and you're putting something in the outboard position over here on the passenger side, check out where the shoulder belt for the center passenger seat is coming from. It's actually inboard of that latch anchor rather oddly, so there may be some interference and some cause for concern there. That belt position also means if you plan on installing a base station or a child seat in the center position with the shoulder belts, it's going to interfere with that outboard buckle also, just due to the location of that belt anchor. On the other hand, thanks to the width of the interior, there is plenty of room between child seats like this and the door when properly anchored in place, so I wouldn't have any concerns about the deployment of the side curtain airbags. And as you'd expect, we have 3 sets of top tether anchors, and all 3 head restraints are movable and removable, so they should be pretty easy to get those anchors through. When it comes to the design and the parts quality, I think Hyundai has really done a good job with the Tucson. The interior feels more premium than average, but it also feels more modern than average without being too crazy modern. And what I mean by that is they didn't do away with the buttons and switches that a lot of customers prefer. I also kind of appreciate the column-mounted shifter. This appears to be something that is spreading across the Hyundai lineup. You won't find it in every vehicle out there, but it is getting more and more common. And I appreciate the fact that it's not different in the EVs and the hybrids and things like that. So as this spreads across the lineup, it may be really normal for people to interact with. But when you go in for a closer look, you'll notice that there are some important details that have changed, like the 2 screens are now behind one sheet of plastic, and it now gets the latest software from Hyundai, which includes wireless Android Auto and wireless CarPlay, which is definitely a welcome touch. We also get the latest over-the-air updatable infotainment system with all of the latest software details. And of course, a restyled LCD instrument cluster with that latest theme, which is a little bit flatter and maybe a little bit more modern than what we saw before, although I kind of like the previous design if I have to be honest. Over here we find a fingerprint reader because that's one of the technologies that Hyundai is bringing down the line. And of course the latest Hyundai steering wheel with the 4 dots, which is H in Morse code. We're seeing that in not just the electric vehicles, but also the rest of their lineup. We have a pretty thickly wrapped steering wheel for a mainstream car. I do find it very comfortable, and we have sport grips up top and sport grips down below. We also have another feature borrowed from their EV lineup, which is this column-mounted shifter. This is really quite practical because it helps save space in the center console, and they were able to give us that space back in a usable way. And they were able to give us that space back with these larger storage bins and cubbies going on here in the center. We have lots of physical buttons, so they haven't abandoned those. Knobs for the dual zone climate control, some touch buttons for the other features, and then physical buttons for a lot of infotainment controls. Down here we find the USB inputs for the system. And this is one easy way to know which version of Hyundai's infotainment software your car has, because if you have this button right here and those icons, then you have the latest version. It allows you to change what this USB port does, whether you want it to just charge a device or charge and interface with the system, so say wireless CarPlay. If you have a passenger in the car and another passenger in the car and you just want to charge devices but you want a wireless CarPlay away, then you want it in that charge-only mode. Of course, we also have a wireless charging mat right here in the center, and I have to admit, one of my least favorite key designs. Here's what's going on. The silver seems to be relatively thin on this key, and it does seem to wear off pretty easily. You can see this one already has a little bit of scratching going on there, and under that silver is just white plastic. I think that the previous key just looked more attractive, although this is kind of cutesy with the H logo there in that button pattern. Another thing to watch for in here, we do have quite a lot of shiny black plastic around this center console, and that is going to scratch more easily than some of the matte plastics we find elsewhere. We have a Qi wireless charging mat there, with two big cup holders, and lots of physical buttons. Hyundai has retained a lot of these that other manufacturers have thrown away, including a feature like this one where we can actually command a more complete locking of the center coupling. We have the drive mode toggle there, auto brake hold, the 360-degree camera button. The button activates not just the 360-degree camera, but also the parking assistance system, and that's the automated parking both inside and outside the vehicle. We also have, as I said before, the blind spot monitor system in addition to the blind spot monitoring camera. So you do have both of those things in here. Back on the center console, though, we have some additional storage space right under there, and a reasonable storage area behind that somewhat small lid. So this does appear on the small side, but there's actually quite a lot of storage behind. Then we have the seats, which look pretty similar to what we had before. We still have that sort of silver U shape right there under the two-way adjustable head restraint, height adjustable shoulder belts, and this big panoramic moonroof that expands, or spans rather, from the rear passengers' heads all the way up here to the front. The buttons and switches, those are basically the same. We have a bit more shiny black plastic up there and slide to the side sun visors. The fabric headliner gives way to a plastic A-pillar cover that looks very similar but doesn't feel quite as premium. On the other hand, we have lots of premium materials on the doors, including an interesting combination. So we find soft touch materials on the upper section of the door, including an after-stitched injection molded piece. If you look right there, you'll notice that stitching isn't actually holding anything together. We then have a fabric insert, which helps dress things up a little bit, and then harder plastics as you go down the door. But around the door handle there and that armrest, that's all soft touch material as well. The only hard plastics are down there at the bottom of the door. That is going to change based on the trim level you choose, however. The lower end trims, they're not going to feel quite as nice. That fabric strip runs across the dashboards. You'll find it right here, separating this little storage tray from the air vent area, and the only air vents are over there and over here. So it's not one big air vent running across. We find a big bin-style glove compartment right there, but it's worth noting we don't have a rubber mat or anything like that in here. It has a kind of a different texture. It's not exactly hard plastic, but it's not going to keep things from sliding and rolling around. Also, this fabric is probably going to get dirty a little bit more quickly than the injection molded materials above and below. Thanks to the more powerful electric motor and the transmission refinements, 0 to 60 times are definitely faster than before. We clocked 6.8 seconds in this model. That's about 0.4 of a second faster than the RAV4 Hybrid and definitely faster than the last Tucson Hybrid we tested. Also pretty decent, the stopping distance, 119 feet from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That is shorter than the last RAV4 that we tested, and you can thank the relatively light curb weight of the Tucson Hybrid for that. I say relatively because, again, there are lighter models out there. But I think Hyundai did a really good job balancing the priorities with the Tucson. These aren't the widest tires, it's not the lightest vehicle, but it does have a really well-sorted suspension. You can drive this a lot harder than you think. And because we have a regular mechanical all-wheel drive system, it has a more traditional, more sure-footed feel than we find in a RAV4 Hybrid or a CX-50 Hybrid, because those have an electric motor on the back. So in this vehicle, if you're headed to a corner here and you for some reason wanted to drive harder, you don't get torque steer. You don't get that pushing to the outside of the corner like you do in a RAV4 Hybrid or a CX-50 or really any of the other hybrids on the market with an electric motor in the back and more power on the front axle, because this can almost completely lock that coupling, balance power about 50-50 front and rear. But the feel is not entirely traditional. Remember that even though we have a 6-speed automatic transmission, this is a full hybrid, and it will turn the engine off quite regularly, especially if I put this in some of the more eco-focused modes. For instance, now it's just driving along in electric-only operation. And that means that how fast the 0 to 60 time is kind of going to depend on exactly what state the engine is in. You will end up at around maybe 6.75 seconds 0 to 60 if the engine happens to be on at the time. That's not something you can just directly command though, so even if you're in the sport mode and you're stopped, the engine's going to be off. On the other hand, when you're driving on roads like this, whether you're in electric operation or gasoline operation, the feel is largely traditional. Dig a little bit deeper in the throttle, you have to wait for a transmission shift to happen. You do get some initial acceleration thanks to the electric motor and the large amount of torque, but you still have to wait for the transmission to shift to get the most acceleration out of the vehicle. Regenerative braking also is perhaps a little bit more muted than we find in the RAV4 in terms of actual capability into the battery, but that also has a very traditional feel. Transitions between mechanical and regenerative braking, friction braking I should say, are very, very normative. You don't have that awkward pause that you find in a RAV4 and sometimes some of the competition, CX-50, etc. This has a very linear, very normal brake feel. The steering response is also pretty direct. It's kind of lifeless, of course, because it has electric power steering, but the steering is very direct. It's very easy to tell exactly where the vehicle is going. This hybrid system is among the most refined in this segment. Acceleration is not as smooth as a planetary power split system like the RAV4 Hybrid, because of course we actually have gears to change in this system, but I think that everything else is so well done that on average, I actually rank this just a notch higher. The regenerative braking feel is better, and I think that transitions between hybrid and EV operations are actually a little bit smoother here. I think that's possible because one electric motor is starting the engine while the transmission doesn't have the engine coupled to the system, and then it can couple the engine to the other electric motor, run that power through the 6-speed automatic transmission. You'll also notice that shifts are a little bit smoother, a little bit more refined than the average automatic transmission, thanks to the inclusion of that electric motor. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that we're on here, I think Hyundai did a really good job with the ride quality, not just due to the design of the suspension, but also the choice of wheels and tires. Again, they decided not to put some sort of crazy big wheel on the Tucson, and as a result, we get more cushion. I think this is just about the perfect tire size combo for something this size. I could have wished for a wider tire, but I wouldn't have wanted a lower profile tire. In our cabin noise testing, I measured 71 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour, but there's also a little bit more going on. If I slow down here and floor it again, you'll notice that even though we do get engine sounds in the cabin, we get a little bit less of it in the cabin than we get in the RAV4 or the CX-50 Hybrid. It's a little bit more refined, and it doesn't just hang out at a particular RPM because it has a 6-speed automatic that actually has to shift. I don't think that's anything one way or the other, but I know a lot of folks really dislike CVTs or hybrid systems where the engine just hangs out at a particular RPM as they accelerate. For some reason, it bugs them in ways I just have never fully understood. The downside to the design of this system is fuel economy. We've been averaging 36.5 miles per gallon, which is actually a little bit above the EPA score of 35, but that's nowhere near the 40 to 42 miles per gallon you could very easily get in a RAV4 Hybrid, as long as we're not talking about the outdoorsy versions with the all-terrain tires, etc. The regular hybrid models will easily get 40 miles per gallon in mixed driving, and they're going to be a little bit more efficient in stop and go and slow and go driving. The advantage of the mechanical all-wheel drive system is easy to see on a road like this. This is not the only mechanical all-wheel drive in this segment, but here's what's going on. If I floor it, we don't get any steering wheel pull, we just get acceleration. We also don't get that awkward thing that we find in the CX-50 or in the RAV4 or other all-wheel drive systems where the front wheels are spinning and spinning and spinning before it sends power to the rear. If you're on a muddier road surface or you're on snow, ice, etc., that can actually mean less traction and more getting stuck. If you're in sand, for instance, you don't really want the front tires to just be spinning before you can send power to the rear. And in a RAV4 hybrid system, that is required. The engine actually has to start spinning up so it can generate power to send it to the other electric motor. In here, you just press this little lock button, it closes that coupling, and away you go, no fuss, no muss. Whether you're in electric operation or hybrid operation, doesn't matter, you get power to the rear immediately. And again, it can send about 50% of its power to the rear. You'll notice that most of these vehicles have 3 prices listed in this range. That's the base MSRP for the entry-level model, the top-end hybrid price, and the top-end plug-in hybrid price. There are a few things to know. There is a plug-in hybrid CRV, but it's a hydrogen plug-in CRV only, so it's not on this list. There's no plug-in hybrid Forester at the moment, And on the CX-50, the extra price there with the asterisk is the $45,665 top-end price of the turbo model. That's actually more expensive than the hybrid model in the lineup. For every other option here, the most expensive model is either the hybrid or the plug-in hybrid. With that out of the way, let's dive into the competition. Clearly, the first model we need to talk about is the Toyota RAV4, because this is the best-selling small crossover in the US and likely the best-selling hybrid in the US as well. Although we're not quite sure exactly how Camry is lining up lately, since that's all hybrid. Big thing to know about the RAV4 is that we're probably going to see a new RAV4 model soon. All the rumors are indicating that probably around this summer, Toyota will start showing us what that new RAV4 will look like, and we might see it on dealer lots either towards the end of this year or maybe early in calendar year 2026. The RAV4 has a lot going on for it, and I think it's easy to see why it's such a good seller. It's reliable, I think it's well priced, it's a Goldilocks just right size as long as you don't need to put taller people inside. We'll get to that in just a moment. It's of course very reliable, and I think it's actually quite attractive looking as well. There have been a lot of rumors that Toyota is going to go in a different styling direction with the RAV4, and I really hope they don't do that. I sort of hope it continues to look like a small version of the truck family rather than getting a little bit rounder like it was in previous editions. Now, as to the size, the RAV4 prioritizes cargo capacity over rear seat capacity. On the outside, it's also a little bit smaller than some of the other options. That results in a fairly tight back seat. If you don't have or don't plan to have kids in rear-facing child seats, it's probably not going to be too much of a problem. I can comfortably sit behind myself if I were a passenger in the vehicle. So someone 6 feet tall driving, someone 6 foot tall behind, that should be just fine. The problem is if you want to put adults, even someone shorter than me with a rear-facing seat behind, that is tricky. And there's really no way you could do extended rear-facing with some of those bigger child seats around. Also, generally speaking, the RAV4 is starting to feel a little bit old. Some of the plastics on the inside and the way that they're mating with one another, it just doesn't feel quite as premium as some other options. The panel gaps are not as consistent as some of the other alternatives in this segment, most notably the Tucson and the Sportage. They're just put together with parts that fit better together on the inside. Next up, we have the longtime nemesis of the RAV4, the Honda CR-V. Honda definitely got aggressive with hybrids in this generation, and they expect about half of the CR-Vs sold in the US to be hybrids. But Honda's hybrid system is definitely different than the RAV4's. The RAV4 uses a single planetary power split system, so single planetary gear set, 2 electric motors, and it's a serial parallel hybrid. At pretty much all speeds, it's able to mechanically send power to the front wheels, or have some power travel through an electrical path. The CR-V is different. It's a serial hybrid below highway speeds at around 45 miles an hour and up. It can connect the engine to the wheels and have a mechanical connection there, but it's not overly efficient at higher speeds. If you keep your speeds to 65, maybe 60 miles an hour, you should be getting around the EPA numbers. If you're in Texas and you are driving 75 or 80 or 85 miles an hour, you should know that the CR-V is going to be notably less efficient than some of these other options, just because of that single fixed ratio and the fact that if you're commanding more power out of the system, it reverts to a serial hybrid mode. On the other hand, it drives more like an EV than any of the other options in this segment because if it's floored, it actually is an EV. It's just that instead of a big battery pack, it has a small battery pack and an electrical generator basically on board. Next up, we have the Ford Escape. Its hybrid system functionally is very similar to the RAV4's hybrid system, but the Escape is not long for this world. All the rumors point to Ford discontinuing it after this year. It's also worth noting that the plug-in hybrid is not available with all-wheel drive. So let's just move on to the Mazda CX-50. This is a brand new entry in this segment, the CX-50 Hybrid, I should say. And the hybrid system in the CX-50 is basically a Toyota RAV4 Hybrid transplanted right into the CX-50. Same electric motors, same engine, and even the same rear electric motor. The CX-50 is a bit tight inside, and the conversion to a hybrid definitely creates some compromises in this model, which surprised me because Mazda announced the CX-50 as being developed with that hybrid system in mind right from the very beginning. So I am surprised it wasn't packaged a little bit better. And packaging really is the only trouble with the CX-50. it just doesn't fit as much inside as the other alternatives because it has a relatively low roof line, some packaging compromises for the battery pack, etc. On the other hand, it has a pretty powerful turbo. It's actually one of the most powerful turbo options available in this group. 6-speed automatic transmission though, that's kind of the downside to the turbo and the not turbo regular models. On the other hand, fuel economy is definitely good with the Toyota hybrid system, and it's likely going to be pretty reliable. Handling is not up to Mazda's normal level with the CX-50 because the CX-50 doesn't get a fully independent rear suspension. It's one of those weird little twists with some of Mazda's latest inexpensive vehicles. And that's perhaps why the CX-5 has continued around, and it's likely that the CX-5 will continue a little bit further with some other generation. Next up, we have the Subaru Forester, which is yet another vehicle with a Toyota hybrid system. Sort of, because the Forester is using a traditional Subaru all-wheel drive system and a Subaru engine. They're just jamming a Toyota hybrid system between the two. So I'm really interested to drive this Forester. If the video for this is not already out, it should be coming soon because when I'm filming this video, we haven't driven it yet, but Travis is going to be at the launch event. I'm going to be doing something else, so be sure and stay tuned to see how that system drives. Most likely, it's going to sound like a regular Subaru because it does have that boxer engine. The all-wheel drive system should be just as capable as any other Subaru because it's exactly the same all-wheel drive, but fuel economy is going to be significantly improved because we have that Toyota hybrid system in there. They basically took the motors from some of the other larger Toyota hybrids, not directly from the RAV4, rotated them 90 degrees, jammed them in a Subaru transmission case, and hey presto, you have a Forester. Now, the Forester, it's not quite as affordable as some of the other options, and Subaru seems to be able to sell their vehicles right at MSRP. There's been a lot of drive from Subaru shoppers to get a Forester hybrid, so keep that price tag in mind when you're shopping. It's probably going to be commanding a bit of a premium when it first launches. And this brings us along to the platform mate of the Hyundai Tucson, the Kia Sportage. The short answer between Sportage and Tucson is it just depends on whether you like the Hyundai logo or the Kia logo and which dealer is closer and nicer to you because they're very much the same vehicle. They use the same hybrid systems, same plug-in hybrid systems, same engines and transmissions. The curveball from the Hyundai Kia group, I think, is not the Sportage, it's actually the Kia Sorento because this is an oddity. It's tweener sized on the outside, so it's a bit bigger than average for a two-row compact vehicle, but it's actually a little bit smaller than a Toyota Highlander on the inside. And it's smaller than a Toyota Highlander on the outside, but about the same size as that Highlander on the inside, and priced more like the Tucson and the Sportage. For $33,405, you could get yourself a Sorento hybrid. And if I were shopping in this segment, especially in the middle of this segment where you might be looking at a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, I would probably gravitate towards that Sorento. Not necessarily because the third row is that usable, but you do have it, so in an emergency you could definitely use it. It's about as comfortable as the third row in the Highlander, for whatever that's worth, but because you get more cargo capacity without it, and you have the versatility of having it there and having that bigger cargo area with very little compromise. Performance, fuel economy, etc., they're all very, very similar, as is the range in the Sorento. And I kind of like the styling of the Sorento just a little bit more. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Are you interested in something like the Tucson Hybrid? If you're shopping this versus the Toyota hybrid systems that are available in this segment, and I'm including all of them here, bear in mind that the Hyundai hybrid system does have a belt that needs to either be inspected or replaced at around 60,000 miles. I have spoken to a decent number of dealers. They say that since nothing goes wrong if the belt suddenly breaks, other than, the system doesn't function anymore, but you're not going to be stranded necessarily by the side of the road. You should be able to exit the freeway if for some reason it breaks or it just won't start in the morning. They tend to tell their customers not to worry about the 60,000 mile time, and they tend to replace them a little bit later. But you should speak to your dealer about that if it's a concern. The belt itself is not terribly expensive, but the service appointment to replace it could cost about $300. So that is something that you should be aware of if you're considering one of these. The fuel savings, it's still worth it. If you're shopping Tucson versus Tucson Hybrid, I wouldn't worry about it at all. I would get the hybrid. Ditto with the plug-in hybrid. Personally, the belt doesn't bother me at all. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section. Be sure and find us over on the merch store, over on the other videos, including that Forester Hybrid video, either happening already or coming up soon. And I'll see all of you next week.